playing, yes. Just be thankful for the good things that you've got. Do you know who actually taught that to me? Have you guys heard of a comedian called Ahmed? Ahmed, yeah. You know he's Egyptian, right? And he was actually a deacon in the church and everything. Like, he's my age, so we were friends and stuff. And he's the one who taught that to me. He taught me that song. He really liked it. Are we recording now? Are we online? Okay, I'll stop talking. All right, let's start. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So, yes, removing the mask is what we're going to talk about. And hopefully by now, you guys have had a little bit of insight into what it means when we talk about putting on a mask. Really, what we're kind of talking about is that when you put on a mask, in some way, you stop being your true self. You're no longer being authentic, right? You're kind of pretending to be someone else, to be someone that you're not. And of course, there is one place where people do that for a living. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where do people pretend to be someone else for a living? And we actually all applaud them. Yeah, in the theatre, in the movies, on television, and so on, right? People act. And just as a little bit of trivia before we get into the really deep stuff, the word for mask in the ancient Greek world was often the same word that was used for face and mask, right? So like your face, your flesh and blood face, and the mask that the actors put on, because when they did plays in the ancient Greek world, they always wore masks. Like, that was the tradition. That was the way that they did it. They put on the mask of the character and they walk around, being that character. And the word is prosopon, which basically comes from pros, which means something before you or in front of you, and ops, which means not oops, ops, which means the eye. So any of you who are optometrists, that's where the word comes from. It means someone who measures the eye. Ops is the eye. So prosopon is that which is before people's eyes. And you can see how it could come to mean both the mask that the actor puts on, because that's what the audience sees, that's what's before their eyes. And of course, outside of the theatre, when you meet a person, then that becomes what you see, like their flesh and blood face. And so prosopon eventually then came to also mean a person. And later on in the Christian world, theologians argued over whether Jesus has one prosopon or two prosopa, I suppose it would be. Right? Is Jesus just a human person? A unity of a human and divine, but in one person? Or is there a human person and a divine person? And you'll be pleased to know we're not going to go anywhere near those difficult theological questions today. That's not our topic at all. But I do want to take on this idea of putting on a mask in order to act in a play. One way to think about who you are is to think of your life as a kind of a story, just like the kind of story you see in a movie or in a play and so on. And who is the author of that story? So I'll leave you to think about that question for a minute. But first, let me just sort of get you into the mood of thinking of your life as a story. What happens in a story? One thing, one event follows another, right? There is sometimes drama, sometimes there is comedy, sometimes there's tragedy. People react and interact with each other. And you can see that it's not just chaos. There's actually something that ties the sequence of events together to make up a story. And often you start to, to feel sympathy with a character. You like a character, or you might end up hating a character and really not liking that character. And I think the way that we do that, the reason we get so invested in the characters and sometimes in the stories, right? Because people cry in movies and in theatre and so on. Why do we get so invested in it? Because we...
Otherwise, we're going to keep us there to keep us out.
Oh,
Not
okay.
me, but the rest of the people have to.
All right.
Can you just
Okay, yep. So apparently the people who run the place have asked that everybody needs to wear a mask. Apparently that's a rule of the conference. No, I'm doing that one today. That's me.
Okay. Say that as well. And if they find anyone not wearing a mask, they'll... All right.
Okay, so apparently they're going to do a spot check. And if they find someone not wearing a mask, they're going to ask them politely to leave.
No, they're going to ask the whole group to leave.
They're going to ask the whole group to leave. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, I brought my mask. Apparently the speaker is okay. All right. So when I stop speaking, I will put my mask on immediately. But it would be good, guys, if you have masks. Do you want a minute to grab them if they're not nearby? Put them on. We'll give you a minute. So this is a very good this is kind of the opposite of what I'm talking about. I'm going to tell you how to remove your mask, but while I'm doing so, can you please put on your masks? Because until you put them on, how are you going to be able to remove them? Exactly. I agree. You don't have to wear a mask. It's okay.
Yeah, she saw me and she's like, mask, but I'm drinking.
Yeah, like if you're drinking, the person drinking is fine, but we have about 80% that will not wear masks and not drinking. So that's what, and they've told us 4 times already. So we're just on purposely not listening to instructions. So it's a law, and then we get in trouble by the government if we're running a campsite not following rules.
Okay, so let's get back. Now that you have masks on, let's see how we can take them off. Not the physical ones, the spiritual ones, the personal ones that we're going to talk about. Okay, so if we think of our life as a kind of a story, let me come back then to the question of who are you in your story and who is the author of your story? Because your life is the kind of a story where you not only get to be one of the characters, but you also get to kind of have input into where the story goes and what happens with the story. So, what does it mean to remove the mask in a story? Are you pretending when you take on a particular persona, a particular prosopon in your story? And we all do this in some way to some degree. So, for example, there are times when you take the role of the hero, right? My child, we were just talking with the kids about being afraid to go to sleep in the dark at night. And what does a parent do? A parent goes into the child and cuddles the child and comforts the child and makes them feel safe and secure and sings them a lullaby until they fall asleep, right? You save the child from their fears. You're playing the role of a hero. And before you get too excited, sometimes you play the role of a villain, don't you? When the child wants something and you're not going to give them that thing and they get really upset and you put your foot down and you say, no, we're not going to be able to do that. And then you kind of play the role of a villain. So is that being inauthentic? When you take on these different roles in your life, are you somehow being hypocritical? Is there some way in which you are putting on a mask when you take on those roles? As the actors in Greek tragedies, would put on a mask to take on a role. Do you think that's being inauthentic or not? To play these different roles. I have to say the kids were much more talkative than you guys. On the other hand, the story I was reading them was much more interesting than what I'm telling you now. So the question is, everybody has to kind of play different roles at different times in their life. One day you'll be the hero who saves someone. One day you'll be the villain who upsets someone. One day you'll be the breadwinner. Another day you'll be the servant. Another time would be the criminal who did the wrong thing and asked for forgiveness. We play all these different roles in our life. Is the fact that we're kind of playing different roles, behaving in different ways, in a sense, putting on different faces, is that hypocritical? Okay, why not?
You're playing different roles for different scenarios.
Yeah.
Can't think of an analogy, but it's like, I don't know, when you go to work, put your local hat on.
Yeah.
Go home, you're going to treat your wife and children the same way.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're not going to, go home and talk to your wife the way you talk to your boss. Well, actually, maybe that's a bad example because you probably will. You're not going to go to work and talk to your boss with baby language. You could imagine that, couldn't you? Good morning, bossy, bossy, bossy. How are you today, coochie, coochie, coo? Okay, you're not going to do that, right? So clearly, it is not hypocritical to put on different roles at different times that meet the situation, right? That suit the situation that you're in. Sorry, was that a hand?
My child don't eat lollies after 9 p.m. because it's not good for your teeth and then they see you eating lollies after 9 p.m. That's me playing the role of a parent, but it's also me as well.
Right. So I agree with you. Let's now dig a little bit deeper into that and ask, what is it that makes that situation hypocritical? Right, where you've told your child, you played the parent, you told the child don't eat lollies after 9 p.m. and then you went behind their back and you ate lollies after 9 p.m. What makes that hypocritical, but talking to your boss with baby language isn't hypocritical? What's the difference? What makes one wrong and the other okay?
I was just going to say, I guess you're telling them not to do something that you're directly doing, whereas the other option is just dealing, like, speaking to your boss.
Okay, yeah? What were you going to
I was
say?
going to say circumstantial, like it depends on what the situation is. Like obviously, when you're talking to your boss, you're going to be talking in a dialogue that's professional. When you're saying to the child, you shouldn't eat this slowly before bed, you're doing it because you know the advantage of not having that chocolate outweighs, the disadvantage of eating it.
Yeah, so in a sense, what you said to your child was true. Eating lollies after 9 p.m. it'll rot away your teeth, right? Because I imagine it's because like you have sugar in your mouth and then you just sleep, so the sugar stays there and it has a chance to dissolve your enamel and everything. So, right. You're saying something true. So that's okay, right? That's not hypocritical. You've done nothing wrong to say that to your child. But it's when you then know something is true and yet you go and do it anyway behind your child's back. Surely that's got to be like a really important factor, hasn't it? Right? You haven't done it in front of them. I suppose it would still be hypocritical even if you did it in front of them. But to hide it also, kind of makes it work. In a sense now, what you've done is you've gone against what you yourself believe to be true. Is that what makes it hypocritical, do you think? Were you going to say something, Em?
No, but I don't know if it's the right example. After telling the time, you can't have lollies after a certain period of time or good.
Yeah.
This is usually it's just two different things. I don't think it'd be difficult. A child can have it, but lollies. I should have lollies. So I don't know, but I know what you're trying to say, but I don't know if I'm following with that example.
Yeah. Look, lollies may be debatable. After 9 o'clock, I don't think you've got a point there. I'm sorry. Even you shouldn't have lollies after 9 p.m. Unless you want to make a lot of money for the dentist. That's just how lollies work. I'm sorry. Yeah, but I mean, look, we can think of other examples where that's not an issue, like, say, smoking or doing hard drugs or something like that, right? That would be, you wouldn't have the same problem there. Yeah. All right. So, okay. So this idea of truth then has to be a part of this idea of being authentic. So it's not really about whether you're playing a role or not. The question is the role that I'm playing somehow real, somehow true? And let's come back to this idea of thinking of life as a story, right? So what would make the difference between a story that is true and a story that is not true? And I think most of us have some idea that there is this kind of core essence of me, right? There is this who I am inside. And sometimes when I behave in certain ways and take on certain roles, that is the true me coming out. And then sometimes when I take on other roles, that's not the true me. And I think all of us have had that experience. You've heard of imposter syndrome, right? In work where people are doing a job and they're constantly kind of doubting themselves. Am I really good at this? Am I really able to do this properly? And so on. And they have this constant nagging anxiety that they're just an imposter. They're pretending to do the job and people don't realize that they're actually not able to do it. That would be maybe one kind of example of this idea that I might play a role that I feel is not the real me. Or sometimes in a family where, and I know every family is different, but sometimes you have one parent who's the disciplinarian and the other parent who's the pata, the tapa person, the one who, the kind person. And then sometimes a parent feels that I'm not really the disciplinarian, but I'm being forced to play that role, and it's not really me, so it feels uncomfortable. Or I want to be the disciplinarian, but my partner's already done it, so now I have to be the kind one, and it doesn't come naturally to me. I'd rather be telling them off. So sometimes, like, we feel that we're put into situations. I think servants, when they first start serving Sunday school, some abooners, me, for example, when they first become abooners, and so on, right? We feel that we're in a role, and is this the real me? So what I now want to move on to is who decides what the real me is, and how do I know who the real me is? Because that will hopefully take us to the end of the talk, which is how then can I remove the mask? If I know who the real me is and where he comes from, how can I then try to live most of my life according to that real me, rather than these other things? So most of the time, when I'm not the real me, when I feel like there's some kind of a conflict between the role I'm playing and the real person inside, most of the time, that's not something I chose for myself. Most of the time, that's something that other people imposed upon me. They asked me to do something. They asked me to play a certain role. As for example, when, this is a completely hypothetical, fictional scenario. As for example, if my wife tells me, you need to go and get the kids in trouble because of what they've done. And I may not feel like I want to go and get the kids in trouble for what they've done. So you get the idea that often these scenarios are imposed upon us by others. It almost makes us feel that I am no longer the only person who is writing the story. I'm not the only author of the story of my life. Other people want to get in there and change the story. They want to write bits of the story themselves. And often, particularly in the modern world, we resent that. We get really upset about that. No, nobody else is going to write my story. I am the only one who's going to write my story. Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt resentful towards someone who's expecting you to play a certain role, expecting you to go in a certain direction, and you don't want to, and you start resenting them? Why are they putting this pressure on me? I should be the only one who is the author of the story of my life. Well, I do want to say to you that expectation that you will be the only one who is the author of your life, I'm sorry to tell you, but it's a pipe dream. It never happens. It is impossible for it to happen. Because there are so many other inputs that go into making the story of your life over which you have no control. Did you choose your parents? No, you didn't. And yet that had a huge impact on the story of your life. For example, they gave you your set of genes, not your Levi Strausses, but the genes in your cells that make you tall or short, dark or light, the color of your hair, the color of your eyes, to some degree, maybe even your temperament, your character, your personality, whether you're a happy-go-lucky person or whether you're a very anxious person, and so on. Right? You had no choice over that. And yet that plays a very large role in the kind of person that you become and in what happens in your life. The community in which you live. What language am I talking to you now in? English. Did I choose that? No, of course I didn't. Simply by virtue of the fact that I live in Australia, over which, by the way, I had no choice. It was my parents who decided, although I'm very grateful to them. I thank them every day. And I teach my kids that they should say thank you to our grandparents every day for bringing us to Australia. But that wasn't something that I chose. But that is why I'm speaking to you in English and not Swahili or something like that. The kinds of experiences that you had when you were growing up, when you were at daycare, when you were at school, when you were in Sunday school, all of those things, you didn't choose any of those things. The people who influenced you, your teachers, your parents, your uncles and aunts, your friends at school, your heroes on television, etc., you didn't choose any of those. And yet they have an influence on who you are and how you think and the direction that your life goes in. Maybe even your career that you choose was influenced because you happened to have met someone who inspired you at some stage in your life and made you think that this would be a good path to follow in your life. So there are all of these other factors, and there are even factors that might shock you a little bit. Even just the physiology of your body sometimes decides who you are and what's going to happen in your story. So, for example, did you know that people have found that the state of the bacteria in your gut, in your bowels, can determine your mood, believe it or not? That there are certain situations in which when they get out of balance, it seems they actually cause clinical depression, believe it or not. So whether you eat enough yogurt or not may be one of the reasons that decides the direction of the story of your life. Things like that. So this idea that I am somehow the author who gets to write every word of the story of my life, and I should be able to choose everything that happens in my life, I'm sorry to say it's just a fantasy. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That does not make you inauthentic or hypocritical when other people have an influence on your life. Because a lot of those influences are actually very good influences. Like, for example, the fact that my parents chose to move from Egypt to come to Australia. I didn't have a choice in that, but I'm very grateful that that happened. And if they had asked me as a 4-year-old, actually I think they may have asked me as a 4-year-old, although my memories are very hazy, I have to say, would you like to leave your home and your toys and your friends and go somewhere far away where you don't know anyone? I'm pretty sure my choice would have been, nah, I'm not going anywhere. I wouldn't have wanted to leave. And thank God that that choice wasn't mine to make. So I can be thankful that other people can have a good influence on my life. Maybe then what it means to be authentic is not to write every word of the story of your life yourself, but to act as an editor, to do what you can to edit all of those different sources, all of those different things written by all of those different people and things all around you, right? You have no control in them invading your life, but you do have some control on where you're going to take them from there. what's going to happen next in the story of my life after they've invaded and they've come into my life. And that, I think, is where authenticity lies. Because then how are you going to decide in which direction you're going to take those things? And here I think what it really comes down to is, in a way, it's a very, very simple choice. It's not really about whether you're going to choose to be, a happy-go-lucky person or an anxious person or those kinds of things. It really comes down to a choice between the love of good and the rejection of good. And I know that sounds very, very simple, but pretty much most of the choices that we make in our life, certainly the important ones, really come down to that choice between light and dark. And that's where the real you is going to be found. And that's why in our eternity, the thing that's going to determine where you are in eternity is going to be whether you chose to love the light or whether you chose to reject the light. And that's really what it really comes down to. So, if I want to be authentic, if I want to remove the mask, it doesn't necessarily mean that I stop playing roles. It means that I ask myself with every role that I play, because I have to play roles, is this role going to bring light into the world, or is this role going to bring darkness into the world? And that choice is who you really are. That makes you who you really are. In some ways, that's kind of disappointing, but in some ways, that's kind of a relief. Because it's really not that complicated. It's really actually pretty simple. It comes down to something that's really very simple. So I want to finish now then with some more sort of practical points, and then we'll be done. The first one is that if our life is a story, the nice thing about a story is, well, certainly with the story of our life, is it's never going to be finished. It's like, I don't know, what's a long-running show that never seems to finish on television? Home and Away? Is that still going? Wow.
It's still on.
Okay, I remember like being young and seeing Home and Away on television. Okay, so maybe our life is a bit more like that, maybe in more ways than one, because sometimes our lives are a bit of a soap opera. The thing is, though, that the characters change, right? In any good story, the main character at the beginning of the story is never the same as they are at the end of the story. And in some ways, that's the whole point of the story, isn't it? Like, that's where the excitement is. That's where the interest is. How did that character change? How did they evolve? And that editing role that we have over our stories is where we get to have input onto what kind of character I become. And I'm highlighting this point because sometimes I might, at some moment in time, look at myself and look at where I am in the story and feel disappointed and feel sorrow and feel upset that I'm not what I want to be. It's really important to remember that the story isn't finished. That so long as you're still drawing breath, there is always room for the character to change and to develop. And there is always room for the dramatic turn of events, for the astonishing surprise that suddenly is going to make everything look different. It doesn't just happen in the movies and on television. It also happens in real life. So remember that. The second point I want to highlight is it's all very good to talk about how our life is a story and we can have that input, and the idea of being authentic is to make a choice. But do you want to live without a mask? This is another question that we have to ask ourselves quite a lot in our lives. Let's face it, some of those masks, some of those inauthentic roles that we play, some of those roles where it doesn't really fit with my decision to follow the light, Sometimes we choose the darkness, let's be honest, because it's more convenient, because it makes life easier, because it gives me an advantage over other people. It helps me to get what I want. Doesn't that happen sometimes? Sometimes it's so much easier to be a hypocrite. I'm sitting in bed, 10 o'clock at night, the bag of lollies is sitting next to me. Yeah, man. The bag of lollies is there next to me at 10 o'clock at night. I know I just told the kids that they shouldn't eat their lollies at night, but what am I going to do? I'm going to eat them. Why? It's so much easier to give in sometimes, right? Sometimes there is a lot of pressure on us. So we need upfront to have a strong motivation. We need to make that decision and reaffirm that decision every day of our lives. I choose the light. I choose the good. And I am willing, if I need to sometimes make sacrifices. And maybe even sometimes to suffer. Because I would rather suffer and be in the light than to have life easy and find myself in the darkness. So this needs courage. And it needs consistency, right? It needs for me to follow that decision in different times of my life, in different situations, in different places, with different people, to learn, in other words, to look at every situation in life, no matter how humble or simple or how dramatic and momentous, to look at it through the lens of that decision. The real person that I am, my real face underneath any mask or any role I might put in front of it, is the one who loves the light and is seeking the light. Where can I find the light in this situation, whatever this situation may be? Now, I want to finish with one last kind of objection, because some of you will say to me, but isn't there sometimes some benefit in, you know, the saying, fake it till you make it? I'm sure you've all heard that, right? So sometimes I may want to be honest, but it's really hard. And there are so many pressures that are stopping me from being honest. Or I want to be kind. Let's use this as the example, right? There's this guy at work who, frankly, I simply cannot stand. I just cannot stand him. He just gets on my nerves because he just does. He does all of these horrible things and he's stupid and he behaves in really stupid ways and he doesn't get it. He thinks he's the bee's knees. And every time I see him, I can just feel my blood pressure rising. But I have chosen the light. And when I look at him, I have to try and see the light. Okay? So when I walk into work and he comes up and he says, "Good morning, you idiot," to me, and what should I do? If I've chosen the light, do I grit my teeth and calm myself down and lower my voice and say, "Good morning, my friend"? Right? When I really don't mean it. When really inside me, there are shorter words than friend that I would like to use. Am I then being inauthentic? Yeah, I've no idea what I mean by that. Am I being inauthentic? Am I being a hypocrite when I do that? Or not? What do you think? Badir is tugging thoughtfully. That usually suggests that something is about to come out. Why? Yeah, do you agree with that? Or do you think, no, that just... You could. There are other options. You could also give as good as you get, and stuff like that, yeah. But I don't recommend that one. Yeah, look, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
He wants to like the God and tell him what he wants. But I think
But he doesn't necessarily.
she doesn't, but it's not that he's taking it too strong. And maybe he's too strong. I just really worried that there's so much pressure on the kids to be someone else than themselves. That the idea of taking anything now is just really bad.
Yeah.
It's just like their mental health. This is just something I learned last week that was girls they don't pick them up really quickly because they can fake doing the social stuff, so they don't pick it up. But the girls then realize this isn't me. They work so hard doing this, but often their mental health suffers. So I think because people we are, we're going to try and get better. I just don't like the way Facebook is, and it's just got to try. So what I look like is I'm not going to. I look like a Christian who's trying.
Right.
I don't want to be fake about it. I'm struggling maybe with it.
Yeah.
I just think the message for our kids is you've got to be you. You can't be what you're not, or what you make you to be. Otherwise, there's too many pressures on us.
So if the real me actually takes pleasure in cursing him and hating him and, thinking horrible things about him, then to be the authentic me would be to let all of that out, for example, right? And if I know that that's a bad thing to do, and I know that the social expectation and the Christian expectation is that I should be nice to him, then surely I am now no longer being authentic, right? Because I'm inside, the real me wants to hate him and does hate him, and I'm putting on a face, a fake mask on the front, pretending to be kind. And I agree with you, that would be wrong, right? And that would be horrible and awful. But let's go back to the idea of my life as a story, right? And the best actors are those who actually, apparently, I'm told, are those who, when they're actually performing, it's like they are no longer themselves, they become the character. And they actually spend hours and days before the play getting themselves, teaching themselves, rehearsing how to be the character and actually trying to think like the character so that when they're actually performing, they're actually being authentic in a sense. They have become that character and they're just, and sometimes therefore they can actually like ad lib. And it works because they don't have to think about it, they just are the character. So we might call that, rather than faking it, that's more like rehearsing it. So maybe what we need to talk about is not faking it, which is that bad hypocritical thing, because I hate and I'm pretending not to, but it's, I have a desire. The real me wants to forgive and be kind and love, but I don't know how to do it yet. So what I need to do to learn to do it is to rehearse. And then when I turn up at work and I do bite my tongue and I smile, I'm not holding on to the hatred. I'm trying to teach myself to actually make those words of kindness true, to make them sincere. And they may not be at the beginning. Just like for the actor, at the beginning of rehearsals, it's not real yet for them. They still feel they're acting. But maybe if I do it day after day after day, like the actor who rehearses day after day after day, I might eventually learn to get into that headspace, and then it actually changes who I am. It molds who I am, and I become that kind person. And now it is no longer a mask. It is no longer pretending. It actually is me. So yeah, I take your point that fake it till you make it. Maybe that word fake it has so many bad connotations. That's not what we're talking about. We should change it to rehearse it till you... Oh, it's got to rhyme with rehearse. Great stuff. Rehearse it till you don't curse it. That was very quick, Mario. Well done.
There's a difference though, like if someone doesn't treat me nicely
and I'm just saying hello to them.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of keeping the peace, I'm being polite.
For sure.
But it's different to when I'm having a conversation with them. I'm saying, I've missed you, we haven't caught up, we should go out for coffee.
Yeah.
That's then,
Yeah.
I feel like
I
pushing
agree.
it too far. You're really putting on a mask.
I agree. And there are actors who like overact, right? And maybe that's the analogy there, that's the parallel. So yeah, nobody likes an overactor.
People like say hello, say good morning,
Yeah.
but then don't exaggerate it and ask about them and tell them you've missed them or
For
tell them you
sure.
should hang out or go for drinks or whatever it is.
Absolutely. So that somewhere in between, there's that golden mean, right? Where I'm not overacting, but I'm also not like, being a hypocrite. And somewhere in the middle there is where I'm learning how to be kind in a balanced sort of way. Yeah.
What if I asked you to miss us?
Ask you to?
What about that scenario?
Yeah.
That asked you, why did you miss us?
Oh, did you miss me?
Yeah.
What would you say? You'd say? Would you mean it?
You're not inviting them over.
Okay. I think I'm going to have to think very carefully about everything you say to me from now on.
Just saying to being glad or being away from everyone through
Okay.
COVID.
Sorry, wait, go on, Michael. What did you say? You could say, I saw you yesterday. Yeah. So, yeah. Look, it is a very good question though, because that is a situation where there is pressure on us to be hypocritical, isn't there? Right? Social expectations and conventions and all that sort of stuff. And I see what most of you are doing is you're kind of trying to find a way to kind of get around it. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Sorry, you have to raise your voice a bit. Yeah.
So someone that is saying that stuff to you,
Right.
being kind to you,
Yeah.
I doubt that they would go out of their way to ask you, have you missed me? Unless they're making it as a joke.
Yeah.
I don't think.
That is, maybe they have some bad intentions when they say that.
Then you say no.
And that would be okay. Look, I mean, I know one fellow, sorry, but I'll just come to you back very quickly. I know one fellow who I know what his answer would be. His answer would be, I don't think we have the kind of relationship where I would miss you. We don't know one another that well. Sorry, you go ahead.
When you say, yes, I missed you, but it's not true, but trying to become the person that I missed you. Rehearse. Like the same way you're rehearsing. Initially you're saying, my friend, you don't mean that.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of the same pattern.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if that's your intention, if your intention is, I want to say this because this is the goal I want to achieve, I think that would be okay. I don't think that's being hypocritical in a sense. In a sense, did you miss me is asking for some kind of acceptance from you. And to say, I'm going to try to miss you is actually the expression of some kind of acceptance towards the person. So in a sense, I think that probably is still, I mean, I don't see that as hypocritical. I don't know if anyone would disagree. Okay, yeah, go maybe.
Yeah, he said, because I've chosen a life, I'm going to, how do we remind ourselves that we've chosen a life? Like how do we, it's very easy not to remember that.
Yes.
At the moment of what you need to remember.
Yes, well, that of course is why we have prayers and the Bible and liturgies and sacraments and all of those things, spiritual books, like all that spiritual stuff that we do. I mean, ultimately, that's kind of the goal of it. It is a constant reconnection with that headspace where I am in the presence of the light and I sort of reaffirm my love of the divine light, of the goodness of God. And I'm kind of reinforcing it every time I do those things. So that's certainly one way. And may I just point out that that is such a better way to approach our spiritual practices than to think of them as some kind of a duty that I have to perform and, tick the box and so on. Right? Think of it as this is valuable to me. This is actually the thing that I desire the most deeply. And these are the tools that will help me to achieve the thing that I desire the most deeply. How can I use them better? How can I learn to use them with more and more effectiveness so that I'm constantly reminded of my commitment to the light? So that's one thing. Having people around you who have that commitment often helps. And that's one of the lovely things about having a retreat like this, or indeed about even just coming to church on Sunday, all being together. Okay, then you're kind of with other people who are kind of, without sort of saying it out loud, but everything that they're doing is aimed towards, choosing the light over the darkness. And that can be very powerful. That can be a very strong influence on us. I mean, we are built to be influenced by other people around us. Even from the very smallest stage, that a baby, I think it's like really soon after they're born, within a few weeks, if mum smiles at the baby smiles back, right? That's how deep it's programmed into our brains and into our bodies, that we respond, we mimic what other people do. So if you surround yourself with people who love the darkness, then that's going to be tugging you towards the dark side. If you surround yourself with people who are seeking the light and choosing the light, that's going to be tugging you towards the light all the time. So that also, makes a difference. And I know that you can't do that all the time, right? I mean, you don't get to choose your workmates. And I'm sure some of them are not very full of light most of the time. But then that's when you have to focus on the things you do have some control over. What is the atmosphere at home? Is it an atmosphere where that commitment is very clear in everything that we say and do, or not? When I go to church, what kinds of relationships do I have with people? Are they relationships that encourage that or not, and so on? Even like choosing the books that you read, the things that you watch, even that can sort of have an effect on that sense. Even the news that you listen to. Can I tell you, I went through a stage in the Trump years where I was spending a lot of time reading the news because it was just, talk about drama, it was just so dramatic. Whatever you think about the rights and wrongs of it, you have to admit it was a really entertaining show to watch it all unfolding. And I found after a while I was starting to feel like depressed. And I realized it was because I was so engrossed in it and following it. And it's just such a dark place. That, there's so much self-centeredness and politics and backstabbing and hypocrisy and so on. I realized the more time I was spending in that world, the more that world was infecting my inner life, my inner thoughts. And sure enough, when I sort of cut it down, almost completely, but not quite, when I cut it seriously down, I felt the light shining again, coming out of it again. That's something in my control, right? That's the editing that I'm able to do. I can edit to some extent what things I allow into my inner life. There I have some choice. It's limited. I can't stop everything, and there are some things that I can't get even if I want them, but to a large degree I can make those choices. And I think that's another way that I can sort of constantly, every day, reaffirm that commitment to the light by making the right choices there. Okay, anything else before we wrap up? Alrighty, thank you all. So I will remind you that as you remove the mask in your person, please put on the mask on your nose, because apparently we're going to get kicked out apparently if we don't, and they're going to do a spot check. Okay, thanks guys.
Thank you very much, everyone. Just a reminder,